name is Hijuels Twicheta, and my European name is Tim Michel. I am Secwepemc, and I was born in Kamloops, the Secwepemc, but my people are from Stalin, which is Adams Lake area, which is about 35 miles east of Kamloops. And I just want to acknowledge that myself, I'm a migrant in this area, and I really hold my hands up to all of the host nations in this area, in particular the Omashquim, the Skokomishkukumik, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Coquitlam people who are sort of share the ownership of this area. I just want to add that in acknowledgement as part of our reconciliation requirement or whatever, it's a way to start with that focus on better friendships and recognizing the peoples of this area, because we are usurpers of this land, and we need to find ways to come to grips with that ourselves as we work and play and live in this beautiful area. And most of us are like me. I was never invited to this area. I just barged in. There's very few. My father was one of the very few that was invited into this area. He was invited into the Omashquim community because they wanted to have a basketball coach. So he was doing a year of studies at University of British Columbia, and he was looking for a place to live, which there were like, I think 8 of us kids or 6 of us kids at the time. And so he's looking around, and Eddie Sparrow said, "Well, we heard you're a basketball coach. Why don't you? I'll rent you my old house and come in, and we'll try to arrange to get you to coach our basketball team." So he was one of the few that was invited in. Now, I myself wasn't invited in, although I do have relatives in this area. So I just want to really set the tone that we are all migrants into this area, and then we do have responsibilities, in my mind, to acknowledge the people of the area and make some type of commitment, whether it be monetary, whether it be accommodating in our work, in our personal lives, or whether it be like myself in my will, I decided to put in a provision that 5% of my estate would go to the Coast Salish peoples in the form of some kind of scholarship or monies to help students from the local area. So that's just what I'm doing. And it's part of my whole reconciling with the fact that I'm here as an unwanted migrant.
Thank you, Tim, for your acknowledgements. I'm Melanie Cortabasi. I think everyone knows you here, but I'm the Associate Dean of Undergraduate Programs, but I'm also the co-chair of the Reconciliation Working Group. And we're here to have our presenters who have been recipients of various kinds of curriculum grants to present on their work. And I realize that this is a busy Monday morning, and so I'd like to start without ado. But before, I just want to mention that we have 6 different units at the university represented here. Urban Studies, the Bill Reed Center, Economics, English, History, and Psychology. So it's a really broad representation of FASS. And I'd like to ask Kamala Todd and Annika Eras from Urban Studies to first.
Danse Kiawao. Good morning, everyone. There's always technical issues, and I am really honestly grateful that I can join by Zoom. I'm actually speaking to you from Gibson's today, so hi for accommodating people who have to join this way. I'll just introduce myself real quick. I was born and raised here in Vancouver and grew up all over the territories of the Hunkaminam and Squamish speaking people. My name is Kamala Todd. My mother is Loretta Todd. I come from a long line of matriarchs from Cree and Métis territories, from Red River all the way west to places like Edmonton and Lac La Biche and St. Paul de Métis. But Vancouver, Burnaby, North Van, and now Gibson's are really the only home that I've ever known. So I'm very much a product of that displacement and part of the urban Indigenous community in Vancouver and the diaspora. On my father's side, he's a first generation of German immigrants. And I just wanted to share how I came to this work and my gratitude for the support and what I do. I'm a practitioner faculty. I just joined faculty a year ago. Before that, I was doing some teaching in urban studies with a course that I was able to develop thanks to the support of Dr. Meg Holden and some, I think it was like the first round of decolonizing and indigenizing grants that came out, which supported me to develop a course that was really about my approach to learning and my relational ways of teaching and working with the local nations and people who, you know, I consider to be my extended kin, and really trying to bring in those ways of teaching and upholding Indigenous knowledge and so on. And so the grant was what we called Indigenous City, investigating ways to decolonize urban studies within the Vancouver context. That was the report that resulted from that fund. And I have been, you know, asked to kind of speak to some of this, getting this support. So we did do a talk a couple years ago as well. And basically, fast forward, it led to me being able to be part of the department in a part-time basis, but as associate professor of professional practice. So just to show that there's a long line of support here that has resulted in, you know, some courses being developed and you know, me bringing in my little bit of perspective around Indigenous knowledge and decolonizing learning and building relationships with the people whose lands we're on. And now I will turn it over to Annika to introduce the project. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll give a very brief overview and background to the project. My name is Annika Aras and I'm a term assistant professor at Urban Studies. I came to this work as a learner, as a Finnish settler and scholar, non-native English speaker, and I'm deeply grateful for Kamala and Meg Holden for this collaboration. As a non-Indigenous faculty member, I've learned so much from Kamala about respectful relationship building and respectful protocols for engagement, and Kamala's strong connections have given us this incredible opportunity to learn from Twice Twanatsis and Senakulawis and their family about these lands and languages. And Meg Holden, who is also here today, has played a key role in all of this work in grant writing and co-teaching and enabling learning opportunities like this to happen at SFU. Kamala, could you turn so the funding we received from FASS was used to support the ongoing work at SFU Urban Studies towards truth and reconciliation and the growing support within SFU for decolonizing and indigenizing curriculum and ways of learning. As faculty, we do recognize that urban research has long marginalized Indigenous knowledge. And in our pedagogical work, our emphasis is on land-based learning, on sustainability, colonialism, and reconciliation efforts in the city. So one of our early initiatives was a workshop as part of graduate course in urban studies. Can I get the next slide, please? Come on. This workshop was called Sustainability Beyond Google Translate. And it was tied to graduate level learning in sustainable development in urban studies. We focused on the value of the value of language in sustainability and touch upon local indigenous lands and languages. The goal was to learn about sustainability knowledge beyond Anglo-centric and colonial definitions of sustainability. Can I get the next slide, please? And the FASS Reconciling Curriculum Grant program has helped to support further pedagogical engagement with members of the Squamish Nation in our urban studies teaching and learning. So we've complemented also the FASS grant with urban studies funding that was used for example, seeds and plants and food and gardening supplies. This workshop development project in Squamish language for sustainability takes on the challenge to respond to both Truth and Reconciliation Call to Action number 13 regarding the preservation and promotion of Indigenous languages and Sustainable Development Goals number 11 to make cities more sustainable. So this project was built to support Squamish language promotion and preservation and building towards more lasting relationship with our existing Squamish collaborators and toward respectful protocols for use and interpretation of language and culture with the Squamish Nation.
So thank you. Yeah, my background is working with the city of Vancouver over the years, and then also with the local nations on various projects, whether it be film or planning projects, but also as urban Indigenous community as well. And so in my own teaching, I'm very focused on thinking about the land language, which is a really big influence kind of framing for me that comes from Jeanette Armstrong, the Okanagan educator and writer. The idea that all lands across this continent have their own land language, and the relationship that the First Peoples have with their land and their laws and their planning traditions and so on. So, in recognition of the impacts that colonization has had on, the vast diversity of Indigenous languages across this land, one area that's really important to look at when we're talking about the city, when we're talking about urbanization, healing the land, sustainability, and all the things that are really current in the conversation, is remembering that the city is an Indigenous city here in this context, and remembering and acknowledging that there are original languages. So in the case of this area, Hunkaminam and Squamish. So as we're exploring, talking about healing the land and urban sustainability and green transitions and a lot of these kind of Western Anglo terms about sustainability, a lot has been left out of that conversation. And there's this deepening needed to see, whose lands we're on, what are the original sort of approaches to stewardship, to land care, and what are the words for that, and how does, how can the rest of us learn from that and honor that and uphold that? So there is the recognition of the impacts on the languages of this place and all over the continent, and also how a project like this can both contribute to talking about urban sustainability, contribute to upholding the beauty and the importance of Indigenous languages and the specificity of this place and the languages here, has been the approach. But also recognizing that, it's not just the language, it's not just a word, it's connected to a whole, way of being. And so the project itself and how we've been working has very much been, driven by the ways that Sis and Sinaquala, as, matriarchs of their community, as cultural knowledge holders, do their work, and how, our relationship is and how things are growing through that. So very much, every time we have a meeting, the children are there. Sometimes the dogs are there. They are very much people who welcome people like us, outsiders, into the community as family. So we've been spending time at both Hamalchison, Pename, the Harmony Gardens, at the Hamalchison Cap Reserve in West Vancouver, but also some of the other sites that Sis has helped create throughout the city that are really devoted to healing the land. But the focus for the students so far has been Harmony Gardens, but as we'll tell you, we're going to be looking at workshops in a couple other spaces in the city as well. But this is really, been able to come to the gardens, to bring food, to bring gifts, and to be able to also provide a good, decent honoraria for Cease and Sonoquala has been, really great that work's been supported. And just really trying to avoid an extractive approach to kind of coming in, learning some words, and then leaving. It's very much a relational project and way of being. And with that, there's lots of learning that's come through this. One of them being that there isn't necessarily a word for sustainability, and that kind of approach of like, what's the definition, or how do you translate this word into your language? That of course it's much deeper and wider than that. It relates to people's, cosmologies and worldviews and ways of being. And we can speak to some of the concepts that we have learned from Cease and Sonoquala at the end. But so there's been learning around that, and just sort of listening and seeing that it's part of a bigger conversation. And then there's been learning around the flexibility that's needed, where you might have your own timelines and expectations. But of course, that's not how families and communities always work. Things happen. And so, there was a plan to have workshops last spring, but sadly the family and community lost an elder, and it definitely impacted Cease and Sonoquala. And, they needed to focus on family. And so we just kind of stepped back and waited until, they were ready to have some more conversations and talk about other, ways that we could still have something happen through this grant. And fortunately, Sonoquala, who's, been mentored by her mom and works with her mom, but also is an incredible speaker and teacher and plant knowledge holder in her own right. She's going to be doing 2 workshops for us with our classes in urban studies. So we'll be going to the A-frame for one of them, which is a site where Cease currently has a residency in Stanley Park, where she's been doing all kinds of community-led workshops, and she's trying to create some Indigenous plant gardening there. And then Hua Shuai, which is in Chinatown, and it's a space that Cease also created right between 2 buildings to help sort of revitalize and bring back an urban garden and Indigenous planting. So we'll be bringing our students there. And then through that, recording, and I'll be working on a short film as a learning tool to share some of what's been shared with us by Cease and Sonoquala, but primarily these workshops will be Sonoquala sharing.
I just very briefly wanted to mention just a note on the impacts on curriculum content and practice at urban studies. Kamala, would you put in the next slide? How students have become more aware of non-English languages and sustainability discourse that goes beyond the Anglocentric definitions of sustainability. And learning on the land has really advanced all of our understanding of also about the decolonizing efforts in the city. Keeping this brief before we end, I also wanted to mention, can I have the next slide, please? That the workshops are tied to 2, they are part of 2 current courses at Urban Studies, and they offer student training and mentorship opportunities, as well as learning experience for non-Indigenous faculty members like myself on local lands, languages, colonialism, and sustainability. So the workshops are also tied to ongoing research into Indigenous concept of sustainability, and connected to a SSHRC-funded Saga project that we are a part of. But the focus is on promoting place-based learning and relationship building that honors local First Nations knowledge, languages, and rights. And Kamala, I will leave it to you to close. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, just some more pictures of that beautiful site in Chinatown there, and to say that, the literal translation of sustainability isn't the same in the Squamish language. It's not a separate term. It's very much about caring for the land. And so in trying to kind of come up with equivalent words, you know, Sanakula has mentioned a few concepts and ones that I've also heard spoken occasionally in the Squamish language. Chen Chen Swai, the idea of, you know, we hold each other up, we lift each other up, we work together. And I think that can also be applied to, you know, care for the land is one thing that Sanakula shared. And then Ha Shuai, which is the name of this garden in Chinatown that Cease helped create and is now still being stewarded, and where the students will go with my class in April, which translates to new growth and renewal. So I think there's another concept there that, you know, we'll be working with in just that bringing forward those teachings around care for the land. And as you mentioned at the beginning, Tim, around our responsibilities, you know, as people who are not of these lands, you know, our responsibilities for caring for them, but also supporting the local nations in their care for their lands and their rights to care and steward their lands. So it's all tied up with many things, and just really grateful that, you know, we can continue to have these conversations and to support these educators, you know, they're knowledge holders, they're educators in their own right, and, you know, have our students learn directly from people, you know, from here who come from that long line of important knowledge that hopefully the rest of us will, you know, learn from and take on in how we do our own caring for the land. So, hi, thanks for listening.
Okay, I'm gonna stay here because I think we have mics all around the room. We're going to hold our Q&A until the ending, correct, Tim?
That's right.
That's right. So hold your questions. And I'd like to introduce our next speakers. Just a second. So I'd like to ask Brian Miles to come up to the podium. So Brian is going to present on his work with Bill Reed Center.
So my name is Brian Miles. I am a faculty member, lecturer in Indigenous Studies here at SFU. Today I'm going to talk about a lower division course grant that I received in 2020. The course was called INDG 222, to speak with a golden voice. But first I'd like to begin in a good way, acknowledge that we're gathered on these unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples. So of course in Burnaby, we are on the territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam First Peoples. So these territories have never been surrendered or sold or ceded or given up by these nations. So it's important to note that if we are not from one of these nations, as Tim had said, we are visitors here. We are uninvited visitors. Sometimes I've heard people say maybe try to think of ourselves as uninvited long distance relatives. It kind of changes that relationship a little bit if we think of ourselves as related in some way. So when I do land acknowledgements, I do like to guard against these becoming performative or empty gestures. So I try to share a little bit of something that I've learned about these territories that maybe people who are here can kind of leave with more than they came with. So at SFU Burnaby, some of you in FASS might recognize this picture. It's on the wall up in the FASS offices. So this is an initiative I started in like 2014 to try to, for myself to better understand, but for others as well, what it means when we say we're gathered on Coast Salish territories. So these are place names that were shared by Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh peoples that collaborated on the project. Just to give you a sense of Indigenous names for these lands and waters around SFU. Settler colonialism attempts to replace First Peoples by erasing them and replacing these names with English names has really been an attempt to erase First Peoples' place in their own lands, but also erase that relationship that they have with these lands and these waters. So I just think it's important to note that when we're acknowledging land, that we are trying to counter this attempted erasure of First Peoples in their own territories. So as I mentioned, my name is Brian Miles. I am a settler in these lands. I'm a fourth generation settler. I have Scottish, English, Welsh, German ancestry. My paternal great grandparents moved to Saskatchewan and were sodbusters. Then my grandparents, my father, now my brother and myself kind of run a small little family farm still in Saskatchewan. So that's where my family has settled in what we call Canada today is Treaty 4 territory. And that's the home of the Nehiyawak peoples, the Cree, the Anishinaabe or Saulteaux, the Nakota, Lakota, Dakota, and it's the homeland of the Métis Nation. My family are probably, or I'm probably one of the only people in my family that know we are actually beneficiaries of Treaty 4. A lot of people, it just kind of speaks to the erasure of so many people not knowing in so many places throughout Canada that we are on treaty lands, that we're beneficiary of treaties, really speaks again to that erasure of First Peoples in their own territories and this kind of settler colonialism's attempt to naturalize Turtle Island or Canada as a settler space. So I acknowledge that my family has been a beneficiary of that treaty, and I also acknowledge that the Indigenous signatories to that treaty are not equally benefiting from what was promised to them to be mutually beneficial. So I'm a faculty lecturer in Indigenous Studies. I've worked at something called the Bill Reid Center since about 2009. I was the interim director of the Bill Reid Center between 2014 and 2018, and I'm currently the associate director of the Bill Reid Center. So today I've had a couple. Oh, wait, do I have it upside down? Try again. There you go, thank you. So I've had a couple reconciliation grants over the years. Most recently, I've been trying to use them to bring in visiting fellows to Indigenous Studies and to the Bill Reid Center. But today I'm going to present on the lower divisional grant I got in 2020, mostly because it lends itself better to presentation, but also as presenters, we were all asked to kind of think about a surprise or a challenge we had, and this one really lends itself to that kind of criteria. So 2020 marked the 100, when it would have been 100 years since Bill Reid was born, the famous Haida artist. So the Bill Reid Gallery downtown, which I have a good relationship with, we're putting on a large exhibition to celebrate Reid's legacy and life. It was curated by the gallery curator, Beth Carter, but also by Reid's last apprentice, Gwai Edenshaw, a well-known Haida artist in his own right. So having taken part actually as a student and as an event organizer and a couple of President's Dream colloquiums, I had this idea to design a course that kind of resonated with the exhibition downtown, and like the President's Dream colloquiums would have a number of guest speakers come in that the students could interact with as part of that course offering. So this quote from the Simpson anthropologist Robin Gray really set the tone for what the course was trying to achieve. Residential schools were only part of a system that denied Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing. Other forces were at work, are at work, that attacked and tried to dispossess First Peoples and that generation and generation transfer of knowledge and identity. One of them being the removal, confiscation, banning, and collecting of Indigenous art and heritage items and literally Indigenous bodies from graves and their transmission, their movement into museums for quote unquote study. So Bill Reid's life and career really intertwined with these forces, and thus Reid's life really provided this great prism to look at these topics through. So just a couple of points on how I envision the course going. We would hold our class in the Bill Reed Gallery, this lovely, beautiful space downtown. Students would have exposure to these ways of knowing and being that differed quite significantly from traditional classroom offerings. Their learning would be embodied and experiential, and it'd be transformative as they learned about First Peoples art and heritage with artists, with curators, with community leaders that were visiting the gallery and speaking at the gallery. They would witness protocols for of welcome and introduction and celebration from Coast Salish hosts and Haida people that were there to celebrate Bill Reed's life and career. They would be interacting with the influential artists and community leaders. But as you might have noticed from the previous slide, from the date of the project, the challenge we encountered was, of course, the coronavirus. So this all went down really in the darkest days of COVID. The course had an enrollment of about 30 students for the summer of 2020, but we were all remote at the time. So we thought, okay, well, let's just wait it out. Things will get better. So we pulled the course and relisted it for the fall. The fall rolled around and we only got 8 students enrolled. Nonetheless, we went ahead with it. So we needed to do a bit of a pivot. All the wonderful ideas we had about teaching in the gallery and being in that space, exploring the exhibition, no longer really were possible. And what I've started to call the digital pivot, we decided to create a curator-led virtual walkthrough of the gallery space using like real estate software. And I don't know. So yeah, I just wanted to show you guys a really quick, it's pretty neat. It's a virtual walkthrough. We filmed the curators talking about each piece, and there's various stops throughout. But I can share the PDF of the slides if anyone's interested afterwards. Another piece of the course was that the Museum of Anthropology at UBC also has an extensive collection of Bill Reed works. The syllabus I drew up for the course, so of course was going to visit. We're going to have this class field trip to UBC. That didn't happen. We ended up filming again a curated tour with Karen Defek and Sue Rowley at the museum. We did, however, plan and still get to do a speaker series. So we had about 5 lectures throughout the semester where Bill Reed's apprentices, Bill Reed's collaborators, had a family, all kind of gave talks about Bill Reed and his career. And those were all course content as part of the lectures that the students were to attend, although from home. These still did take place at the Bill Reed Gallery, so we couldn't force students to attend as they were fully remote. So in the end, I feel we did still succeed on a number of levels, even though we had to deal with COVID. We did promote understanding and respect between, I think we did anyways, between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples through these kind of experiential and embodied learning experiences. Of course, they were digital, but I still think that the way we were able to create somewhat virtual environments, that it was more engaging than a simple Zoom or kind of Canvas style lecture. The prominence was really given to Indigenous voices throughout this and knowledge holders. And as they related their experiences of settler colonialism and their approaches to overcome it. There are a couple continued impacts that we're having to, after this course, I actually gave it 2 more times for the 50+ group at continuing studies. So I taught it a couple times there. You might also recognize the Sable Hall. If anyone who walks down Sable Hall, I actually borrowed this from the gallery, and we hung this a couple of years after the show at the Bill Reed Gallery downtown. So we have the walkthrough 3D lecture on a touchscreen in that space you can go through. This gets used all the time by students. I don't exactly know. Teachers must assign, professors assign them this space to have some kind of assignment. I don't know what it is. I've had the daycares come by and check it out. Visitors to SFU come by and sit there and see it. So, in that sense, this was always aimed at students. It was always aimed at the broader public, not necessarily our department or changing curriculum in our department. So I do think it still has legs in a number of ways. It's on the Bill Read Center website with other past exhibits that we've had in that space. All these link to learning resources that we've created with it. And just last year, I was a part of a team in education and SFU library where we did a 3-day professional development series for K-12 teachers and who wanted to use Indigenous arts in their courses, in their curriculum and wanted to do it respectfully without appropriating. So we, of course, part of that was created a big long list of resources to share with them. And of course, we included the Golden Voice work that we did. Yeah, so hopefully that there's still some impacts being had and I of course intend to keep teaching this course. I haven't had the chance recently, but hopefully in the near future, I'll be teaching an updated version of it as well. So that's it, thank you.
Very much, Brian. Up next is Martin Santamaria from Economics.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Martin Santamaria. I'm from the Economics Department. Originally, I'm from Argentina. I'm not gonna do another land acknowledgement because they acknowledge the land. Just gonna, it's customary, as I understand it, among Indigenous groups, when you're introducing yourself in academia, sometimes you talk about your credentials, I've done this, I've done that. When you introduce yourself, you talk about your ancestry, where you come from. So my ancestry come from Galicia in Spain, from Celtic region of Spain, and from Argentina. I came here that way. So the team would say I'm uninvited. I don't know if I'm unwanted. I'm a nice guy, but I'm uninvited. So anyway, just want to talk about project that I did with the support of FASS Reconciliation Grant. The goal was, well, a few goals. The first one was to bring Indigenous voices into the university debate or discourse about economics. Oftentimes, in economics, at least, we have debates about things like economic development, should we build a pipeline, should we do this, that? The Indigenous voices are missing in that debate, at least in the classrooms in economics. We wanted to also use the funds to support Indigenous groups and efforts. So we invite elders to come and share their view about the situation, and they get a fee for coming here. And for example, one of the ladies that came give a talk, she said, with the fee I got for the talk, I bought a stove, and with that stove, I make all the canning for my business or for her family or whatever. So it's just a simple way of giving back and kind of making the university give back too, because it's not my money, it's the university's money, but it serves that purpose as well. Another goal is to, through these talks, build, at least take the first step towards building a relationship between the university and Indigenous communities, which I think is very important if we want to talk about reconciliation, or another word I kind of like more, healing. We gotta, talk to each other and go a little bit beyond that feeling of guilt that sometimes permeates these reconciliation discussions. Finally, we have a lot of non-Indigenous students that come here from all over the planet who have no clue about what's going on in these territories. About, for example, there's a pipeline going right through campus here, and all the history about that, and how the Indigenous people feel about that, and so that was part of what we were trying to achieve. And so we obtained support from the FASS Reconciliation Grant, as well as from the David and Cecilia King Endowment. So we got more money than we anticipated. So we are not done with this, but so far we have organized 3 lectures as part of a lecture series that we call Land and Water Rights, Indigenous Perspective. When I say we, I was the faculty guy involved with this, but then I had a lot of help from the staff in the econ department. I couldn't have done this by myself. And then we have one more lecture organized, which is not part of this Land and Water Rights series. On February 27th, you're all invited. It's going to be fun. So I'll say more about that in a second. So let me tell you what this, who we invited. The first talk was given by Miranda. I'm sorry, my pronunciation is very bad. She's a Secwepemc hereditary matriarch. And she came to talk to, well, this is the other thing. How do we achieve some of these goals? So I teach a course on economic development. I invited my students to her talk. I told them, if you come to the talk and you give a short written assignment of saying what you liked about the talk, what you remember the most, whatever, I give you credit for the class. That way, students showed up, they were exposed to what she had to say. Miranda is the kind of person that would chain herself to, a pipeline to prevent, and being arrested by RCMP a few times, that kind of thing. Her dad been arrested. Her dad is a hereditary chief. He's in his 70s. He's been arrested by RCMP on his traditional territories, on his land, basically, on his backyard. And they were going through legal issues because of that when I invited her. So some of the fee also probably helped pay for her dad's lawyer. And some of the things she talked about, like I was saying, how do we educate non-Indigenous students? She talked about like the voice or the worldview of how Indigenous people see the land, how they see the salmon as a relative, how we see the river as a relative and that which sustain us. And it's not something that we have to take care of. I mean, rather, it's not something that we can, as I don't want to get too political, but as the Bible, I believe, says, like, all of that nature is there for you to take. That's not how we look at it. We look at it like all that stuff out there is for us to take care of. So it can be there for the future generation because those are our relatives. And those are the things that sustain us. And so that's what I mean of introducing a different perspective of things that students may not have. And a lot of students would never had thought as the salmon as a relative. They thought as something you buy at the store. And that really, I think it was the powerful message about all of these talks. It's like helping students look at things from a different way. Not to mention that, and I will tell a story. I'll say it now since I'm talking about her. One of the most powerful things that happened in terms of the surprises, there was a student from Hong Kong, and he came after her talk and he told me like, hey, and he was kind of like, emotional. And he said like, we have the same problems in Hong Kong. And I'm not excited this is being recorded, but he said, we have the same problems in Hong Kong with the water. We get all water from China. The only difference, so I didn't know this was going on here too, but the only difference is that back home, if we say something about it, we get into some kind of problem. Okay, so anyway, that was good to see how the same message. Then we had two more talks. We invited traditional people with traditional knowledge. Oftentimes, traditional people don't live nearby, so we invited two elders from the Wirarica Nation who came to talk about Don Ramiro. He came to talk about the significance of Wirikuta, which is a sacred site in Mexico, where there are Canadian mining corporations going over there, affecting their traditional ceremonies that they do there. They've been doing that for thousands of years. So I wanted people here to hear what's going on over there in Mexico. Because sometimes that people don't know about it. We don't even know what's going on in northern Alberta. They don't know what's going on in Mexico. And then we had also another Wirarica elder, Don Chabelo. These people are like they call the wisdom keepers in their community who came to talk about what I was saying earlier, the same thing as Miranda, how they look at nature and the importance of nature and the importance to take care of nature and also the importance of nature in human well-being. And so that's basically what we did. And as I said, hopefully students liked it. They also make traditional art. You can see here, Don Ramiro, they were selling some of the products they make. They're all handmade beadwork. That's another way in which they can make some money to support their communities back home and their efforts. Finally, a piece of advertisement, because I'm told I'm running short on time, although according to my clock, I'm at 9 minutes. February 27, 11 a.m., Hayward Outram. I just noticed I misspelled that, sorry. Tomas Ramirez, who is my mentor, I used to live in Chicago. He does work with gangs in the south side of Chicago, using ceremonies, sweat lodge, to perform restorative justice practices. In other words, to help kids who are in gangs, like young Mexican kids, who they're often from traditional indigenous ancestry, but they don't even know about it, get out of the gang. Instead of going to jail, come to ceremony, come to a sweat lodge, reclaim your identity, and straighten out your life. That's the work that he does. It's very powerful stuff. I witnessed, it's dangerous stuff. He's been shot, so it's kind of like pretty spicy work that he does. He's gonna come and share with us about that. So anyway, I will give you more information if you're interested about that. And I guess I'm out of time. So I'll just thank you all for your kind attention. If you have any question, we can talk later. Okay, thank you.
So much, Martin. Next up, we have Leith Davis from English.
Super. Hi, everybody. I'm Leith Davis. I'm a settler scholar and professor in the Department of English and also the director of the Center for Scottish Studies. I'm speaking today with students of various levels here. So do you want to just introduce yourself and then?
Yes, I'm Dana Graham-Lai, and I'm Leith's PhD student.
And I'm Abigail Streifel. I'm a first-year undergraduate student who took her class last semester.
And we also have Michelle Hayden, who quickly I'll just introduce. She's a student from the third year class that I'll be speaking about, and she'll be speaking after this. So I want to begin just by acknowledging, of course, the lands that we are on, and also just saying, as a settler scholar and someone who's done land acknowledgements, last semester, this was my attempt to do more than just a land acknowledgement, but actually put some action behind the words. And so I'm the director of Scottish Studies, and one of the things I noted through my years of working in the field is that Scottish Studies has made some advances in terms of looking at decolonization, transatlantic slave trade, and Scotland's colonial connections with that. But it is very slow to consider marginalization of women and racialized populations, and indigenous perspectives are minimal or missing in Scottish Studies. So I had two interconnected projects last semester. One was a conference and a community engagement event, and the other one was a new course, and they are interconnected. So I'll talk about them first, the conference, and then talk about the course that was connected to it. So I, together with my collaborators, I was the organizer of a conference, an international conference that was called Unsettling Scottish Studies, Canons, Chronologies, and Colonialisms, that was held November 22nd and 23rd at Harbor Center. And I just want to acknowledge my SFU collaborators here, Dr. June Scoodler from Indigenous Studies, Deanna Reeder, Indigenous Studies and English, and Sophie McCall from English, and Amy Parent-Knox-Sawit, who is Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Education and Governance. And also we had a lot of help from Rebecca Salustros from the English department, and I see Ash there too. So thank you for your help on that. Also, we had external collaborators too, Dr. Sharon Elker from Whitman College, Dr. Holly Faith Nelson from Trinity Western, and also Dr. Juliet Shields from the University of Washington. So the conference was multi-generational, multinational, and also multidisciplinary. We had 41 invited presenters, and there were, including with that, both experienced scholars and also people who are developing their experience. So we had 7 PhD students, 2 MA students, and 11 undergraduate students. People came from Canada, from the US, from Scotland, and from the UK as well as New Zealand. And they were in the fields of Indigenous studies, English literature, Celtic studies, education, history, and tourism studies. So really very wide scope there. And strategically, we had invited the Scottish Studies directors, both at the two other Scottish Studies centers in Canada, so in Guelph and also at McGill, and the directors of the University of Glasgow Centre for Scottish Studies and also Aberdeen. And so they were all there, and that was strategic, so that this research actually went back to the source of people who are speaking and teaching about Scottish studies. I'm happy to talk more about what we did. We were unsettling the process of having a conference in many different ways. So try to move away from the 15-minute presentations to focus on discussions. But just briefly, amongst the features of the conference, we had a workshop by Deanna Reeder and by Sophie McCall on indigenizing curriculum. So they presented at the workshop, and that was for people to work on their own pedagogies and to introduce more Indigenous perspectives. We also had 3 public engagement events. The whole conference was open to the public, but these are specifically targeted for public engagement events. So these 3 events included on November 22nd, we had Stephanie Wood of the Squamish Nation speaking about the wonderful new book that's written by a collaboration of Squamish peoples called We Come From This Land. One of the significant things she mentioned, there were 30 people who wrote this book in collaboration, and somebody asked her, how long did it take you? And she said 6 months, and jaws on floors everywhere. Like, how could, she said, we were just so focused on the project. So amazing, amazing collaboration, wonderful speaker. We also had that evening a celebration of, it was called Story Work. So music and dance from the Métis tradition and from Scottish traditions, and some really interesting crossovers there. So we had shot of Scotch Highland dancers and Vinnie traditional Métis dancers. And one of the wonderful things about both of those groups was they brought people to participate in an embodied fashion in dancing on these 2 different traditions. On November 23rd, we had Noksawit, Dr. Amy Parent, who gave a presentation on the remediation story of the Niels Jewell pole, the memorial pole that was stolen in 1929 by Dr. Marius Barbeau. And in 2022, Amy and other members of the Nisga'a Nation went to Edinburgh to National Museums of Scotland, where the pole had been, to whom the pole had been sold. And they negotiated the return of the pole, and it was returned in September in 2023. Scottish Studies at SFU was an ally there, and that's actually me there holding one of the flags, walking and being a witness, and it was incredibly moving experience to be there and support the delegation. So Amy's talk was also followed by powerful, powerful presentation and performance by the Nisga'a Samiks traditional dancers. And you can see here the dancers in their regalia, in their full regalia. So that was the conference. Now, the micro grant that I got was for a course that I developed in connection with the conference, and that was English 433 Unsettling Scottish Studies. This was a course that was 13 weeks of kind of 0 to 60 about Scottish studies, what's missing, what can we do, and particularly focus on BC Scottish connections. Now, that's not something I have worked on in my research, and so the micro grant that I had was, I was able to hire Caitlin McInnes, a PhD student, to help me put together materials that I could then give to my students so that they could work on projects, individual projects, connecting Scottish and Indigenous connections within BC history too. We also had visiting speakers come in to talk who were part of the conference itself. And so my students were able to get to know them before. And my students presented at the conference. So 11 of my undergraduate students went to the conference, brave students. They presented their papers or posters at the conference and were able to meet people there, talk to them. This is my amazing class here. And they were part of that. So getting not just people who are specialists in the field, but actually getting SFU students involved in the conference and in getting them to think in this ways about unsettling Scottish studies was a really crucial part of this. Challenges and surprises, we're asked to talk about that. Well, first of all, space. SFU Harbor Center, we had one room basically that we had to make both a performance space and also a conference space. So it was challenging. Really economic costs, right? We couldn't afford to have 2 rooms, so that was the biggest problem, I think. A lot of organizing of details in all of this and some surprises. I didn't realize we needed a costume change place for dancers. I've never organized a dance performance, so things like that were challenges, but not insurmountable. And in terms of outcomes, we have done, like, I think we've really made a big impact in the field of Scottish studies. People who will go back to their universities with a really different perspective on what needs to be done with unsettling Scottish studies in the future. We're promoting new collaborations between Scottish studies and Indigenous scholars and community groups as well, which really, really want to follow up on those in the future events that we do. We facilitated engagement of students and faculty at SFU and beyond too, in reconciling through featuring these Indigenous scholars and artists too. And finally, encouraging engagement between the general and academic audiences. So by providing this space and these opportunities to bring people together in the same room to get them to dance together, for example, we're encouraging that kind of reconciliation. So that's from me. Just quickly, I really, really wanted you to hear student perspective. So Dana Graham-Lai, who's a PhD student in English, you'll be hearing next from Abigail Streifel, a first-year student, who I also shared this information with my first-year class, and Abigail volunteered to work at the conference. And then hopefully we can get Michelle quickly online too. So Dana.
I'm gonna stand over here so I can see my page actually. My research field is in Scottish women's writing. And I primarily work in the early 19th century, and my research is conducted through the lens of place theory, the environment, and eco-criticism. But I was really happy to have the chance to network and meet scholars at this conference that I never would have been able to meet because they work in places like New Zealand and Scotland and England and the United States. And at this conference, I presented on a 19th century travel narrative written by an English woman about a tour she made to the Highlands of Scotland in 1803, where she reported on the Indigenous people of the Highlands at that time. And attendees of the conference, especially people from Scotland, later shared that they had never considered this text, this journal text or a travel text as something that could perpetuate colonial harms at the turn of the century. So it was unsettling for them, basically. And what I hoped for was that it would reveal the historical realities of colonial harms across the Atlantic and the complexities of the Scottish diaspora, and how we navigate in our field, in the Scottish studies field, questions about the Scottish diaspora in our research today. So through engagement with the Indigenous scholars, oh, really? Okay, so quickly, the conference helped me reflect on my research quite differently. Dr. June Scudler, she spoke quite a bit on critical humility. And so for me, this idea resurfaced throughout the conference, and it made me question how I approach my own scholarship and how I can practice humility in an academic system that sort of values authority. So that for me was antithetical to critical humility. And just as Dr. Santa Maria said, it's also about tracing our ancestry ourselves as uninvited guests to this land. And so I just want to say I am a descendant of the Scottish diaspora myself, and I trace my lineage to Nova Scotia's New England planters. So my ancestors arrived to Nova Scotia as settlers, planters, enslavers, and colonizers. And so that directly feeds in to my own research in Scottish studies. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Abigail, and I'm a first-year student who had the opportunity to volunteer at the Unsettling Scottish Studies Conference. What I found truly special about the event was the way everyone came together to work towards understanding and ultimately reconciliation. It was a great opportunity for both Scottish studies and Indigenous scholars and artists to share their knowledge, cultures, and thoughts. Participating in Unsettling Scottish Studies has shown me that this type of collaboration is so important for reconciliation. Everyone was able to discuss their own perspectives and to learn from each other. Unsettling Scottish Studies helped to educate many people about Indigenous cultures, which is incredibly important in a field that can often center colonial histories and ideas. I'm glad that everyone got to work together to introduce more reconciliation into this field of study. I believe it was an enlightening experience for everyone, including myself. Thank you.
Do we have time just for Michelle to,
Maybe in the commentary later, in the
Go, you can
Q&A.
take my time. You can take some of my time. I'm next.
Thank
Go ahead.
you.
Michelle is
She's
student
prepared
vice
this.
president.
So I'm sorry, I didn't realize that we were being timed from when we went up here. So we had.
I will be very brief then. I'm assuming everyone can hear me all right. Unsettling Scottish Studies, English 433, was not what I expected. I envisioned 13 weeks of Robbie Burns and Walter Scott, and instead we delved more into the unknown parts of Scottish heritage. The largest of those unknowns was an examination of the ties that bind Scotland and the land now known as Canada. From the Scottish aspirations of colonization, through the long years of fur traders and the anthropological theft masquerading as intellectual inquiry, an examination of the Gordian knot which lies between these two entities was key to the course and ultimately defined my course of research. Unsettling became a term where I wanted to focus my studies, replacing European-centered narratives with an examination of Indigenous women of the First Nations of Canada and their relationship with Scottish fur traders. Specifically, my research focuses on Indigenous women who moved to Scotland with their Scottish partners. It was very important to me that I position myself appropriately as the scholar who was speaking not for these women, but of these women. And it was very important that I included that statement in my position at the conference because it placed me as a non-Indigenous scholar and acknowledged that my scholarship does not connotate ownership. The stories, lives, and histories of Indigenous people are inherently their own. Unsettling is not a concept I would have embraced prior to English 433, and I would have missed the gift that was this research. Presenting at the Unsettling Scottish Studies allowed me to place my thoughts about unsettling in front of dedicated scholars who provided me with encouragement and advice, as well as the scholars Dr. Davis brought into the class, who gave me guideposts on respectful scholarship of Indigenous culture and history that I strive to meet every day. More importantly, the English 433 and the conference allowed me to learn of, write about, and advocate for more research, more scholars, and more effort into recognizing and honoring these amazing women. Thank you.
Much. And yes, hopefully we can have some more comments from the students during the Q&A. Thank you very much to Elshanier, who is up next from the history department. And thank you for giving some of your time.
Yeah, no problem. I promise I will be quicker. I will take 10 minutes and really heard that. Okay, so hi everyone. I am indeed Elshanier from the history department. I am from originally from Toronto and of French European and Métis heritage, and I'm just not gonna put my number in here. Give me my face. There we go. Okay. All right. So as a scholar, I am queer and feminist. I write about the history of sexuality. So because I write about the history of and teach on the history of sexuality, this was the course image. So as you can maybe gather from this image, I'm very used to dealing with uncomfortable topics in a very straightforward, head-on manner. So I think that actually works quite nicely to my purposes there. Goodness. Keep my finger on this. Okay. And so history for me has always been a social justice project. And also, though, at the time that these $5,000 funds, grants became available to teach courses, so this is my presentation on this course that I taught, I was also really deeply into meditation practice and studying Buddhism. So I brought a lot of contemplative practices and compassion practices to my teaching. But I want to point out that that came from what I learned as studying Buddhism. But my Indigenous students and people who came to my class always said how the environment was had a very Indigenous approach. So that was just a lucky accident for me that it kind of happened that way. It was quite lovely. Can you go to the next slide? Oh, you want me to go to the next slide? Oops. So I just made a QR code for you if you want to look at the syllabus, because it's all about the syllabus. I'll leave that up there for a moment, and maybe while, in case some of you are checking that out, here's my bag. So I want to talk a little bit about the environment that I created in the class, which was very different. So I meant to bring my broom as well. So we used to clear the desks, put the chairs in a circle, and we had a ceremonial brooming, or sweeping rather. So one of the students would volunteer to sweep the area because there's always dust and dirt, and we would make an altar. Oh, I should say, we were studying the report on murdered and missing Indigenous girls and women had just come out. I'll get to that in a second. Maybe I can go to that slide now. So that's what we were studying. Each week we read 1 or 2 chapters. So we read the whole report from beginning to end. So really, really hard material, right? As you can imagine. And so each week I would come with this bag, which I had actually already started this practice in another class. So this bag comes equipped with napkins, a kettle, and teacups for all the students, and tea. So a student would be responsible for going to get the water. I actually had 2 kettles because 15 students, right? And then for this class, so we set up an altar in the middle of the class, and we always had cedar. I didn't bring cedar, so this is my representation of cedar. And the students were responsible for a murdered or missing Indigenous girl or woman. And so they had to do research on her, create a picture of her. And so these are just some of them, which I still have in my office. And I love how some of them decorated them. And then each week, 2 students would tell us who this person was, a little bit about their history. So we made them like present. So in our class, in the center of our class, and what we discussed. So it was really for them and about them. But it was really about how the course was set up. So, just to talk, here's the little scholarly bit you get. Told you about my background. So I'm always asking about history. What is the use of history? Because sometimes I think history is really useless. I'm always asking questions about it, right? Because to me, history is entirely purposeful, right? And interestingly, this scholar, John Burroughs, who's an Indigenous historian, he wrote this real article that really challenged me, and I just want to read you a little bit from it. He says, the turn to history to define Aboriginal and treaty rights is not inevitable. As UNDRIP makes clear, Indigenous rights need not be rooted in historic claims. Within the UNDRIP framework, Indigenous rights are inherent human rights. They exist by virtue of the current corporeality of Indigenous peoples as political communities. They are part of Canada's living constitution. I'm just going to summarize and say, basically, he argues that historians go in, and the way the courts deal with Indigenous rights is you have to be able to make a historic claim, and you have to prove something existed in history at a time. And he says nobody else has to do this. They need to be asserted in the courts as rights, not as historical claims. Therefore, historians, you're not helping. You're hindering. So that's the argument he makes in this. So it's like really provocative. So it just really got me thinking. That little section leads nowhere. I'm just giving you an idea of all the many things going on in my head at the same time. Historians are always really interested in agency. So I study oppressed groups, right? And so we're always interested in agency. So the argument is people always have the capacity to act, right? And then the other question, which historians don't like to talk about because we're not touchy-feely liberals, is representation. But we all know representation is important, right? Seeing positive images of yourself living adult lives, good lives, is really important in the classroom, right? And we know this to be true. So for me, I'm very aware about providing that kind of representation. And the care issue is this stuff. This is about care, but also, as you'll see in a moment, that I set up the syllabus with a lot of care. The one last thing I want to say about history is that, so the tradition I come from, social history, sort of started with labor history, then women's history, then queer history, racialized histories, right? And labor, women, and queer, we always attend to the oppression and the resistance. But there's a very, very rich literature on Indigenous history, and there's no resistance. Well, very little resistance. It's all about oppression, right? And now we have these young, wonderful Indigenous scholars that are writing all about resistance and organized resistance. But it was really historians, white historians who did amazing work, were really just focused on how, the downtrodden, right? The victimization. And as a historian, and as a queer person, and as a woman, or used to be a woman, anyways, that's another story. I know that it's important to be able to talk about having agency and the capacity to act, right? And have, not just see myself as a victim, right? So to the course and how I set it up. So in all my classes, I told you meditation, I begin with meditation, and I still do that. We begin, well, I don't call it meditation, I call it a 2 to 3 minute breathing exercise. And I say, if you don't want to breathe, you don't have to. So, so I do that. And then each class, my role in this course was to moderate, facilitate. So how did I use the money? Each week I hired Indigenous women, only women. We were reading the report about women, only Indigenous women. And they came in and I used, so here we're reading difficult material. So I always chose women who were doing really positive, happy things like butterflies in spirit, who do dance, right? As a form of activism and resistance. But one of the things I wanted to point out is the second week, the first week we had someone, Bernie Williams, but the second week, oh, it's not showing on, I think it's on the next slide. I think we can't see it because of that thing. Doesn't matter, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. We had 2 amazing women that were therapists, counselors. Took up half the budget, $2,500 for those 2. They were totally worth it. And they came in and gave a wonderful presentation about who they are, what they do, and how to take care of yourself while you're taking this class. So we really began from a place of self-care. And then I was very lucky, Monty Chakaby, who I know, had just put out an autobiography. So, and she's a queer elder, so she was in town giving a talk, so she came to class, and so on, so on, so on. So every week we had these, so really I did no lecturing. I just facilitated these wonderful visitors. They were our teachers, and then facilitated the student discussion. And I think that's all I really wanted to say. I wanted to just tell you about my class, and it was amazing. I want to say thank you to FASS for giving me the money. I would love to do it again and again and again. I'm not willing to do it without paying people really, really well for their labor. So if we could come up, it's impossible, right? Budget cuts, it's crazy, but put that hope out there in the universe and see if we can do it. But I think the model is great. Students loved it. Oh, and the challenge. After about week 4, week 5, I kept saying to my students, is this history? Am I teaching history? Because I really felt like I had just left it all behind and was doing something completely different. And they kept saying, yes, it is. Yes, it is. So it was actually my students who reassured me we were still learning history. This was really grounded and good work. So yeah, so thank you. That's it.
Thank you all. Last but not least, we have Rochelle Fulani from psychology.
Hey, great. Thank you so much to everybody who's presented so far. And I don't know, it's really interesting. Somebody knew how to sequence these. This is going to be glimpses into cultural awareness training and professional development workshops and a curriculum grant from the SFU FASS Reconciling Curriculum Grant Program. So I'm going to be focusing on 2 initiatives that were in 2024 and 2025 in our department. And this is, of course, where we are currently located. We're here right now. and this is where I live. So this is a really important place for me, and I've been very grateful to be up here on campus since 2003. This is, of course, is the map that is available to us through the university, particularly with the work through the Bill Reed Center, with some of the local place names. You will notice that this picture looks a lot prettier than the other one. The other one is I took from an article when there were protests regarding the tank farm and the pipeline expansion. This photo needs to be updated to reflect the tremendous changes on campus in terms of construction and the tearing down of trees and other issues. In terms of a brief self-introduction, yellow is where the far dot on the far right is where we're currently located. And the other two dots, the darker dots, are where my parents were born. So my father from northern Iran, the Azerbaijan region. I myself was born in the States. I'm a naturalized Canadian. I immigrated to Canada when I was a teen. My mother sponsored me as an immigrant to a place where I have long distance ancestors. On my mom's side, there's Northern European settler, as well as her grandmother took scrip. It's called Métis scrip these days in the Calgary region. So I'm a traditionally trained quantitative psychologist, and the work that I do primarily now, I call being in the area of research justice methodology. I'm highly involved in different psych associations, different parts of the university, and in the department, I'm on the Indigenous Reconciliation Committee and on the Justice, Equity, Diversity, Accessibility, and Inclusion work group. I much prefer the word work group to committee. So again, the focus today is going to be on two grants from the workshops program, as well from the micro research and teaching development grants. So in the department, before I go into those two specific ones, we've had a number of workshops that were funded through the Reconciling Curriculum Grants with Michelle Nahani, Lloyd Attig, Carly Fellner, and upcoming will be some work that I'm doing regarding Métis dialogues, Métis identity. Whoops, I went in the wrong direction. But critically, this work is not done alone. These are just some of the people with whom I've had the pleasure of working on just the two grants that I'm going to be focusing on, as well as some of the other ones. So the grant that the first grant that I'm going to be focusing on is the workshop that we had with Carly Fellner, who is Métis. She is currently resigned from her University of Calgary position as a faculty member in counseling and psychology. After getting tenured, she decided she wanted to leave academia and is now based in Rocky Mountain House, Alberta, with her family, her two young ones, and doing a lot of good community work. So the workshop that we held in 2024 was a full-day workshop in this space. It was an all-day workshop. And the title of it was on Indigenous Wisdoms for Psychology, Shifting Towards Survivance-Based Pedagogy and Practices. So this is really trying to bring a recognition of the horrible histories, but also to highlight the strengths, the wisdoms, the resistance, the survivance. I and Michael Schmidt, who is here, I'm very grateful to Michael being here, were the faculty names on the grant. It was available to SFU psychology faculty, staff, and graduate students to attend the workshop. No staff members were able to attend that day. And the Elder Marie Hooper, who is with the SFU Indigenous Student Center Elders Program, was present for the entire day. And lunch and snacks were served by Bannock Queen Catering, Teresa Mark, in this space. And so we were able to get an external Indigenous caterer to provide our foods. So the selected learning objectives were to articulate what decolonizing means in the context of psychological pedagogy and practice, to understand Indigenous counter-narratives and concepts that challenge conventional approaches to psychology, psychopathology, and disease, and how these contribute to personal and collective wellness amongst Indigenous people. And to discuss implementation of basic land-based tools that support reconnecting with, reopening to, and re-engaging one's personal and collective wisdom and medicine for healing. So as a prerequisite, everybody needed to either have attended a previous workshop, actually a colloquium, that Dr. Carly Fellner provided in 2022, or to commit to watching the video. Hour and 15-minute video, hour and a half video, anybody can do it. It's available right now on the SFU Psych Department Indigenous Reconciliation Committee website. And I know that there are faculty members in education who make use of this and refer their students to it. And of course, to commit to full attendance from 10 to 4 on the day of the workshop. No partial attendance permitted, with apologies, of course, to those who were interested. So our schedule began with land and territorial acknowledgement and opening by Elder Marie Hooper, land-based check-in where we were drinking water, thinking about the lands, thinking about the territories on which we're located, and just feeling the land, being part of the land. There was a brief review of the video that I just mentioned, Iskoteo and Crow. So that's fire and crow. Reigniting narratives of survivance in psychology, indigenizing case conceptualization and assessment, personal, collective, vicarious, and intergenerational trauma and wellness, land-based tools for practice. There were lots of very experiential exercises talking about collective and vicarious experiences, talking about transformation and relationality, and then next steps, and how to engage in survivance-based practice in right relationship. There was, of course, a Q&A, and there was witnessing and closing with Elder Marie Hooper. The witnessing was offered by one of the Indigenous students, members of the Indigenous Reconciliation Committee. So this is a layout of the space, and it's very interesting how things align. I was like, okay, we need to be in a circle. We need to not have things around. And sure enough, this was a prerequisite, a request that Dr. Carly, is how she calls herself, requested. I was like, oh, it is, right? This is what we need to do. So of course, in this space with 35 people, it was hard to create well, if she's attending virtually, she needed to be here. And to create the circle, but in a way that she could see us, it needed to be a squishy U. So there's the sort of squishy U. Dr. Carly on this screen, as you would have seen, and then the people in our squishy U. And I have to admit, I did actually have to do a little bit of Photoshop here, blending two separate photos in order to get everybody in the photo. So if you peer carefully, somebody might look to have a disjointed arm. And I was in the chair here at the far corner, so it was really good. So this is where we were, and whoop. Okay. Sorry. Oh yes. So what just happened there. Oh, it's very interesting. So I'll give you a little story. when she was giving the presentation and talking about spirits and spirits coming and interfering, and our technology went out. It was really one of those moments. So some of the land-based tools for practice and experiential exercises focused around water, connected body to land, personal animal thinking. Like imagine, you know, who you might be, who a person that you're having a conflict with might be, talking, paper tearing, taking an issue that you have and taking that paper, looking at that piece of paper, imagining the issue, and then tearing off the part that's not about you, tearing off the next part that's not about you, tearing the next part that's not about you, tearing the next part that's not about you, and ending with the piece of paper, the part of the paper where this is something that it really is your issue that you own. Because of the power of that exercise and the sort of, because we're talking about a problem, I needed to sort of be very careful to collect everybody's paper at the end and take it away and burn it in order to release the problems. There was work that we did with stones. So one of the requirement was, and I love stones. Come to my office, there are lots of stones. But I was asked by Carly to go collect some stones, and we used those in our exercise. And it was really important. And then we returned the stones to the land. So this is a visualization of some of the work that Carly does. I was wearing this particular scarf that day. We gifted her with a scarf from Lisa Shepherd from Métis Crossing, and Carly and I both have family relations from her. So this embodies just sort of spirituality, the land, the structures where we are, and the learning that can come from the collective. I'm going to go with her fingers. 3 minutes. So these were some example testimonies. Dr. Carly Fellner's workshop on indigenizing and decolonizing mental health care was extremely valuable, fosters a culture of critical reflection and proactive change within the department. So I have 3 minutes for my curriculum grant, which was a micro research and teaching development grant. The purpose of this grant was to develop a curriculum module regarding government legislative legal responsibilities, some of psychology's historical record with Indigenous peoples, apologies by psych associations to Indigenous peoples, and steps in psychology towards reconciliation. So I worked with a sessional instructor, and I'm working still, for Psych 308, History and Systems in Modern Psychology. There have been 2 offerings, about just around 150 in each. I provide guidance on the approach to the course, provide guest lectures, and recommended readings for the course. Here are just some sort of snapshots from my most recent guest lecture. I videotaped it so I could analyze it afterwards, and maybe we can see about using it. But critical there, though, Canada's TRC calls to actions and UNDRIP, and apologies by psych associations and societies to Indigenous peoples, and some histories. So talking about UNDRIP, introducing psychology students to UNDRIP, to DRIPA, BC DRIPA, Canadian Constitution was a critical element of my class, as well as talking about psychology's harms, going through literature from 1904 to much more recent literature, highlighting some Indigenous scholars who have been doing work in the area. Representation matters. Reconciling or dealing with the history of residential schools, which is the work done by Roland Christian and Mike Marin. And talking about some positive things, Carolyn Lewis Atneve, who did a lot of work with children in schools and established the network of Indian Psychologists newsletter, which has now become the Society of Indian Psychologists. That's based out of the US, that's the term that they use. There's large discussion as to why using Indian in the name of the society, and they say it's because we're Indian in the treaties, and we don't want to give the government an out for out of the treaties. So a historical overview, legal frame, TRC report, apologies, all of this was part of the lecture. And impact, instructor impact reflection, the major challenge that I encountered was incorporating truth and reconciliation in a general course on the history of psychology without the course being entirely about the topic. They tried different lenses, decolonization and feminism, and felt that both of these were a way to bring in different lenses and also allow for discussion specifically about Indigenous peoples. A student offered a final testimonial, and one of the powerful things there was that it really opened, my guest lecture really opened their eyes, and they're now taking an Indigenous Peoples in Psychology course, which is regretfully only offered on an intermittent basis by a sessional instructor, not a regular part of our curriculum, and there's stuff that we need to do. So we need a lot of follow-up courses. We need to see how we can do better to integrate these material into other courses, and it's triggering topics, and so a lot of care has to be taken. And again, this work is not done alone, and I have a tremendous gratitude to everyone, to Tim, to Melek, to Kate, to the Dean's office, to the university to help create an environment where this work can be done. So, hi, merci, mucha keram, thank you, in some of the languages of my ancestors. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Rochelle. I believe we have about 13 minutes for Q&A. I think it's a little awkward to do from the podium. Can folks online hear me okay? Yes? Thank you. Okay, so that means that folks online should be able to hear us around the table as well. So
and if people want to be seen by those online,
sure,
if you would come up to the front.
right, although it's a bit, yeah. But anyway, do we have any questions for any of the speakers? Yes, Lise.
I have, I guess, one more theoretical question and then some practical question too. And my theoretical question, I heard from Elle and Rochelle about having this experience changing to a certain extent how they see their position within their discipline. And I wondered if other people had that experience, if that has kind of stretched how you see your discipline in different ways or how you position yourself within that. And then just the practical question, I also heard a couple of people talk about issues of Zoom, of trying to get a circle, but not being able to get a circle. So I'm just wondering about having a collaborative crowdsourced thinking about how people have overcome some practicalities of, because what we found is space impacts what you could do, like what you're working with. And I just would love to hear more hacks, works around how people work within, in our case, it was a, expensive catering, expensive space. Maybe impacts what you're able to do, honestly. And so I just would love to hear how people work. How did you get the Indigenous catering, for example? Like, wow, that's great. We tried and we were able to do that.
So this is one of those things where Actually, one of my slides actually disappeared around, which is probably a good thing. Around MEX, working with MEX. MEX was tremendous. But of course, what I did was I looked to all of the different spaces, and it was like, okay, this was really expensive. This room, they offered to us for free.
Because it included students.
Because it included students,
Yeah.
right? It included students. It was very student focused. And also at that time, they were like, oh, we're working on an Indigenous menu, but we're not there yet. I do a lot of work with the Indigenous Student Center, and I know that they get Indigenous catering in. And they were like, well, we'll let you do it, Rochelle, right? So it's about connections, it's about knowing, asking, and they were tremendously gracious. Oh my goodness, wonderful. And so it's about knowing what can be done a little bit, and asking. And if they say no, well, you try again in a different way.
I guess I can address your question about how do I feel about my discipline. So I think what I said says a lot. So the benefit of age, right, is you care less and less about it. And so you just kind of do what you want. But as I said, I actually surprised myself that I kind of kept panicking, because at some point I felt an obligation to my students mostly to be providing history. I don't know why I did, but I just did. But they reassured me it was all good. So I would absolutely, I mean, obviously it's all grounded in history, but we weren't dealing with historical texts. Like we weren't reading about the history of colonization. So that's really it.
And about my discipline, yeah, that age thing really comes in, but also just that it is time.
I know.
It is time. And this is what the apologies are about. There's precedence that we are being called to do this. We need to do this.
Yeah.
Michael, do you want to?
Well, this is the tiny hack that we learned in terms of like, you want to make a circle on Zoom. You can't really, but you can, and this is helpful for round robins and stuff too. But when we did the workshops with Michelle Mahaney, which was sponsored by FASS grant, she had us make a circle. I just told everybody, put your name in the chat. And it's a line, but it gives you a way of kind of going around in order through people rather than sort of like hopping around the Zoom. And so it makes sure that everybody's included and gets a chance to speak. It's a simple thing, but I use it a lot now.
I can share about the location wise, because our events, because I invited the students, had about 30, 40 people normally, and we started at the Diamond Auditorium. I don't know how much it cost. It wasn't cheap, but that's what I used the money for, to pay for a good venue. And then we realized the auditorium was a little bit weird. And I saw the Seawall Atrium, which you know where that place is, right? Where it's right next to you guys. And yeah. I kind of liked it there, especially because there's a lot of traffic and people see what's going on and kind of look at it and come in. But we had a little bit of pushback from our colleague at Indigenous Studies, because they were like, who the heck is this economist, like economics? Those guys are like the evil guys way over there, and they want to come to our backyard and do whatever. So they were like, I don't know. So I said to the secretary, just insist, keep calling, keep telling them, yeah, because they were like, no, we have a class going on, we have this going on, what do you want to do? I said, once they see what we're doing, they're going to be happy about it. And then they actually convinced them to allow us to use that space. And then there was some faculty who came to the talks and they were like, this is good stuff. So now, we have it easier to book that space. I don't know how much they're charging us, but it's worth it. It's a really good space. But that brings me to another issue about logistics, which is getting people to know about what you're doing. Because I find that there's not enough people knowing what we're doing. So that I find also to be part of the logistics of how we get the people who are interested. I've been trying to develop a little bit of a mailing list in the econ department through these events I've been doing. But sometimes maybe we need to kind of consolidate all the mailing lists that we have into one that we can send our activities to, so it can reach more broadly or something along those lines, maybe useful.
I might just offer, and maybe not for everybody, but some of the projects I've done have been partnered with, of course, the Billy Gallery downtown. So they are SFU affiliated. It doesn't mean you get like a big discount or anything like that, but they have an educational space upstairs. It's called the Hummingbird Room, I believe. And it's pretty reasonable. Like it's, I think it's less than $400, and it can hold 20 or 30. It can be set into a circle. You're also in the Billy Gallery, so after or before your event, you can actually like go and see different exhibits and things like that on display. So again, not for everyone, and it's not an SFU space. It does, of course, cost money. But you can also, once you're in their space, you aren't hamstrung by Max or any, you can bring in whatever caterers you want. Well, that's a different story, but generally you can bring in, like, I would use salmon and bannock when I would go down there, and but again, it's pricey, and you gotta weigh what your priorities are. Do we spend $400 on food, or can we have a couple more honorariums, kind of thing like that? It's something to keep in mind.
All right, I think I saw Tim's hand
Yeah.
and then Ellen.
Yeah, I just
There's
want to
also a
weigh
comment
in on,
mine.
Okay.
I just want to weigh in on circles and that. I think when I listen to people from, I'm Secwepemc, I'm Plateau Salish. And so it's about half of the Salish speaking tribes sort of have similar backgrounds to mine. But I remember the Okanagan people, they have a practice that's called an Aukenwiu. An Aukenwiu doesn't necessitate that you have a circle, but what it does say is that you have to make sure that everyone is heard. And sometimes circles can facilitate that, but it's not a necessity to have a circle, but it is when you're discussing something to make sure that an Aukenwiu means that you should listen to everyone. And within my tradition, there's another term that we use too, Saudwauch. And Saudwauch means not only do you listen, but you interrogate every thought that's being said. And so an Aukenwiu and Saudwauch are two aspects of it, and that is that we should be very critical, not in a negative way, but critical minded. And we should make sure that everyone is heard, all the perspectives are heard. So circles, I think, have some kind of aspect that sort of maybe reflects that, but I keep on thinking of Foucault's panopticon. That it's a way to self-police each other. I don't know. So, but I think that if you just are sort of self-policing each other, that's one thing. But if you're in a circle and you're trying to make sure that everyone is heard, that's a little bit different. So it's really how you facilitate it. It's not the fact that you need a circle, it's that you can use that to help facilitate that everyone is heard, and that each person that hears can interrogate that idea, not the person, not negatively on the person, attack the person, but really ruminate on ideas and discuss it. And those are really important aspects of the Plateau Salish philosophies. Thank you.
Give Elle the last word, just because I'm aware we have 1 minute left. But hopefully some of these conversations.
Well, actually, I want you two to have the last word. So my question is directed at you guys, but I just wanted to comment that one of the things I really liked about the circle is it meant nobody had their laptops. It completely changed the experience of being in the space. We really were with each other. We were kind of resting and being present in the moment. And I think that so the circle did facilitate that. But we all know it's different times now. There's not money floating around to finance these kinds of things. So where do you see this going? Like what support for these kinds of initiatives that we're all obviously really interested? What's the immediate future
Tim
for us?
holds the strings,
Okay.
but I mean, you know, Laurel holds the strings.
Yeah, but-
Tim has the details of the budget, but I can say that our problem actually is lack of applications.
Really?
So there's a very devoted group of people right here who does these things, and you know, hats off to you.
We
right?
need to think about how to workshop these ideas
Right.
in maybe a more, this is wonderful and a great start, but
Yeah.
maybe really doing work with people.
Yeah, so
Because I think a lot of
yeah.
people want to do it.
Yeah.
They just don't know how to begin and sometimes are nervous to begin. They don't want to make mistakes. And so I think encouraging, you know, that kind of space and being very charitable and saying, just begin. There's support, like from the people in this room who've done it and elsewhere. Engagement is a battle. And I'm sorry, I have to go. I have another.
Yeah.
No, but I think it's very much what one of you was saying about the connections that you make with your colleagues in your departments, for example, right? You know, because we're 6 different departments here. But it's the usual suspects, right? So, you know, it's about literally, I mean, so it's about having those conversations with your colleagues in your department. I mean, for my part, I'm getting Tim invited to the FASS-UCC on, not this meeting, but next one, in April. So thanks, Tim. You didn't know that yet, but I think we talked about it. And I've asked whether you could be invited to the DAC as well, because I think just, you know, exposure is always good because people come in and out of those roles as chair and undergraduate chair. So a lot of people aren't even aware. But I do think another thing is exactly what Kate said, talk with people, you know. The other thing, the one more thing that I wanted to make this group aware of, the working group knows this already, but there will be a new terms of reference for the awards. So the terms of reference around the awards and how to use them and all that kind of stuff, that will be clarified a little bit more as well, because that will be published shortly, but that's
So they
minor,
will
but I think it
continue.
helps.
Despite the budget cuts, they will continue.
They will continue.
Great.
Yeah, super. Sorry, there was a hand over here.
I was just thinking like, so that there's more like communication between departments, almost in an interdisciplinary way. That maybe there could be a point person in all the different departments that could be sort of a communications person between you guys and each department, and then that person brings information to their department so that departments that are maybe afraid, like you said, or comfortable or worried about doing stuff like this, maybe someone could say, look, these are opportunities for these applications for, because some of like the classes, the different classes that people have had, they're amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that's how can we not do that stuff? You know,
But I mean, I think appointing people is probably.
not appointing, but like
Yeah.
if there's someone that can be undergraduate chair.
Easy way to start that we discussed last time is simply have people go to department meetings, like each one of us go to our department meeting and just say, look, this is available, nobody's applying. So if you're even thinking about anything in those dimension, come talk to me, I'll help you, you'll get it for sure. Well, let's do it. Well, we get the ball moving if we're lacking applicants. I got plenty of ideas, but yeah.
Yeah,
It's nice to get other people involved.
If there's reluctance, like maybe to have someone, like one of us or a pair of us, or to say, you feel reluctant, there's these people who have done it before, why don't you go chat with them?
I also had one last comment or question actually for Annika. And is it? Mala. Mala still there? Did you submit an item from Urban Studies to the multilingual SFU week? Because your project is right on target. And so if you want to be in touch with the World Languages and Literatures Department, who's organizing it, I would love to. It might not be too late to add an event about.
Like Meg did the work for that, but yeah, we have one.
Great. Anyway, thank you very much to everyone, and yes, speak up. It's us.
And thanks to the online people. Thank you.
Yeah.
For hanging in there.